Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Last 2 weeks I ended up on the floor. So now I'm just going to settle in and listen to the show in my big easy chair and enjoy a delicious brew and some pretzels. Get me a Carling Black Label. Anyway, I'm called for my favorite beer. You know, there's nothing better than turning on the Philco console and listening to... Hold on. Where's my Carling Black Label? You know, wrestling and beer go together like teen. Hold on. Where's my... No, don't. Oh. She threw it at me. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Outdated Wrestling Hour. My name is Bob Smith. I used to be the managing editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated back in the 80s and 90s, which makes me outdated. Hope everybody's doing well. Here's something else that seems to be outdated. The preliminary wrestlers, the jobbers, the opening match guys we all got to know and love. There were so many of them. And a lot of them were really good wrestlers. Just because they lost on television doesn't mean they weren't professional. It doesn't mean they weren't great in their own way. I have one of them to share with you today. He's a great guy. His name's Al Schaefer. You know him better as Broadway Sonny Blaze from his days in the WWF. He's got quite a story to tell. He looks back at gratitude, believe it or not, on his career of, well, essentially getting beat up on television every week. This is a really interesting guy and a really great guy and a good friend of mine. And I got to know him and Chris Michaels back in the late 80s, early 90s, and gave him a little publicity as they were coming up. And I never forgot them, and they never forgot me, and I'm grateful for that. I really am. So enough of my yakking. Let's have a conversation with the one and only Broadway Sonny Blaze. Folks, I cannot tell you how excited I am to be talking to this gentleman again. I haven't been in the same room with this fella probably 30, 35 years or something like that. But we grew to be friendly with each other when I was working at PWI. I was relatively new at the magazine at that point, and this fellow was relatively new to wrestling at that point. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Al Schaefer. You know him better as Broadway Sonny Blaze. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me, Bob.
Oh, man. Welcome back into my scene here, man. I don't know if you've heard the podcast at all, but it's been going great. And one of the nice things about this is I'm touching base with people I haven't seen in 3 decades, you know? So it's been a blast. I hope you feel the same way about coming on the show.
Oh, I've been excited about it. I've been excited since we reconnected, just, with the texting and stuff like that. It's
right.
We grew very tight. Unfortunately, just in life, we have very intense relationships, and just for whatever reason, life takes us one way, takes another person the other. Mm-hmm. But reconnecting with you feels like we are in the arena right now, back in 1992. It really does. It feels just like that.
Yes, this is the amazing thing about this. And, I worked for a year with John Arizzi on his podcast, and we would talk about stuff that happened 30 years ago. And it's stuff I haven't thought about in 3 decades. And then a subject will come up or a match will come up, and I'll remember it so intimately. It's amazing how it comes back to you once your memory gets jogged. And I've lived kind of a clean lifestyle, so I have a really good memory after all this time, pushing. I don't want to say my age in the air, but it's old, But I took a few moments earlier and I looked over your match results of your career. You were in the ring. I'm just going to read this because I think the listeners are going to be impressed. Okay. I don't even know if you know all this or remember all that. You probably, I know you do, but this gentleman, as Sonny Blaze on WWF television, took on Kamala, Shawn Michaels, Repo Man, Money Incorporated, the Beverly Brothers, Ted DiBiase, the Warlord, Big Billy Busick, Earthquake and Typhoon, the Barbarian, Coco Beware, Greg Valentine, Bob Orton, Sergeant Slaughter, Rick
Yeah.
Rude, Kurt Hennig, the one man gang when he was known as Akeem, and on and on and on. That's a wrestler, folks. That's a real professional wrestler to hang with people like that. So you must have been pretty doggone good to even get in the ring with guys like this, I think.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I love the little, I'm going to call it a little career, but I love the career I had. I was one of those guys that got afforded every opportunity in the world, Bob. Mr. McMahon tried to help me. God rest his soul, Mr. Piper tried to help me.
Wow.
Governor Ventura, Governor Ventura was giving me advice. Everybody tried. I couldn't execute. And the showmanship part was the hard part for me.
Okay.
But, when I wrestled The Undertaker, that was amazing. And I love looking back because I believe I was his first match. We did a TV taping on Tuesday that aired on Saturday after the Survivor Series. And there were still pins in his costume. And I knew him by the telephone from Cactus coming to my house, and we would watch pay-per-views.
That's Cactus Jack, folks.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mick Foley, right.
Right.
So the night before that TV taping, I went back to the Holiday Inn at Tampa, and he was at the desk, and I'm like, "Hi, hey, Mark, I'm Sonny Blaze. Cactus said, hey, how you doing?" I said, "Is there a problem?" There were no rooms. So I told him, "I got 2 king-size beds. You want one?" And he's like, "Oh, you're God's, you're a lifesaver." He comes, and the next day I'm wrestling him in his first match in that character. And that's just fun to know,
That's a nice piece of trivia right there, yeah.
And there are other people who claim it. So I'm going to say I believe I was.
Okay.
Because it was early during the TV taping and he hadn't wrestled the day before, still had pins in that costume. And I've wrestled him like 3 different times. One time, of course, the first time there was nothing after it was just a pin across my arms. The second time he took Brother Love's rose and crushes it on me. And the third time he actually used dirt. I don't know if that ever aired because that was in Macon, Georgia, and the dirt was red. It showed up on TV as red.
Georgia Clay, right.
So I came up with the idea that they should carry around coffee and use coffee as dirt after that, which of course they always had coffee at the buffet anyway. So that wouldn't be a hard thing to, instead of trying to use dirt, use coffee. So that's my big contribution to the creative of WWF. But,
well, let's backtrack just for people who are listening. You mentioned Brother Love, who a lot of people don't remember was the first manager for The Undertaker before Paul Bearer.
Correct.
And
and I loved Percy.
That's Bruce Pritchard, of course. So.
Yeah. And I loved Percy to death. He was such a gentleman.
I have yet to meet the person who doesn't think he was one of the greatest guys they ever met.
And by the way, Mark would give me advice. Taker would give me advice. Right. And it was always polite advice. It was critiquing, not rude, like, but, and you yourself, Craig, Bill, at the Pro Wrestling Illustrated, The Wrestler and Inside Wrestling, you guys helped. You gave me national exposure, 2-page articles.
Yep. There was one I wrote in my Steel Cage column about you because I had just seen you at a UWF show at a high school in Long Island take on Chris Michaels, and the match was fantastic. The match was really a good match. You two guys were evenly matched. It was exciting. And the whole crowd was really into it because a lot of the fans actually knew you guys, I think, personally at that point. And it was almost like they loved both of you and they loved the result of the match. And I think it was really exciting. And I went back to the office and said, I got to do something on these guys. So I remember I think I gave Chris an introducing feature and I gave you that column.
That's correct.
About your struggles in starting out and ending up. Is it true that Ted DiBiase broke your nose? Is that true?
My nose got broke. Ted did not break it.
Oh, okay.
But it did get broken. I actually split his lip, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm very glad he didn't give me a receipt for this.
Right.
Ted is old school. So when he threw me into the ropes, he's giving me a clothesline with the left arm. Well, I took a step to my left to take the clothesline with the right arm. He took a slight step to his right to deliver with the left arm, and I ran my nose straight into his mouth.
Okay.
So Ted is that much taller than I am.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I broke my nose on his mouth. And the next day at taping, you'll see, well, they covered it up, but I had 2 black eyes and my nose was a little bit swollen. But
There you
yes,
go.
that did happen. And I
But
split his
you know
lip.
how we write these things up, DiBiase broke your nose, right? Because
Yeah,
it's like you make it part of the storyline, or what, your story, so it's like Stan Hansen breaking Bruno's neck with a lariat, which never happened. It's
right.
just it was an actual accident in the ring that caused the fracture. But so in any event,
I'm
so
going to tell
get to
you,
the bottom of that then.
every time I got injured, and of course I had injuries, I blew out my knees, neck, you name it, it's been, but it was never with malice. It was always some sort of error in timing or
Mm-hmm.
just something like that. It was never, um, Barbarian broke my jaw. And he and I were very dear friends.
Right.
And he came off. I had no idea where I was. I took an elbow with my arms locked. Well, he's a very large man, and when he came down, he kind of hit me across the shoulders and got a little bit of my back of my head and neck.
Mm-hmm.
So when I stood up, I had no idea where I was, and I forgot that the boot's coming. And all of a sudden, the boot, boom, and my jaw got broke. He didn't mean to, and he felt
Right.
terrible about it. But
Mm-hmm.
these things happen.
Yeah.
You know?
Looking back at your WWE and UWF stints, okay. Most people knew you as the guy who lost on TV.
Yep,
Let's face it, that's how people would look at you.
sure.
But being behind the scenes, you were, and being a part of the WWF at that point, are your memories good? Was it all worth it? Were you treated well? Give me a picture of what it was like when you were there.
Okay, yes, it was all worth it. Yes, I was treated well. Most guys, the big stars, a guy, I can't say enough about him, Roddy Piper.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Piper treated me like I was on his level. Rick Rude actually said it. The only one back then that I didn't, and I feel bad about not liking him very much back then, but I didn't really like Shawn Michaels very much. But when I watched the match and I saw how much offense he gave me, he was very generous. So, and I also heard that he's not anywhere near the same. He used to just be very braggy and stuff, but he was never a total jerk to me or anything. But no, and I got every opportunity in the world with the largest wrestling company ever existed. It's just when it came to the performance part, I couldn't execute. But how many people get that type of opportunity where you have Mr. McMahon himself was analyzing my matches. He saw me, he would talk to me. And no, I love every bit of it and I wouldn't take a bit of it back.
That's great. That's great. No regrets is always the best way to go through life, right?
Yeah. And, again, Mr. Piper giving me advice, jumping up at a buffet and go, my sonny boy, and giving me a hug. And I'm like, holy cow. Rick
Yeah.
Rude called me his hero. Not Rick Rude, excuse me. Ric Flair called me his hero.
Now, why was that?
There was a matinee. I'm going to call it matinee. It was an afternoon show at Madison Square Garden, and I was always on standby at the Garden. Nobody ever missed a Garden show. But he had gotten a prescription. There was a battle royal, and whoever won the battle royal was going to challenge Mr. Flair for the title. And he got a prescription. He had a little tear in his shoulder blade, and he got a prescription for Motrin, I think it is.
Yep. Okay.
Well, this was on a Sunday, kind of unusual Madison Square Garden Sunday afternoon. And I'm running all over New York looking for an open pharmacy. You would think in Manhattan that wouldn't be a hard thing to find, but it was.
No, I'm sure. Yeah.
And I found a little pharmacy like way off in the nowhere, and I had sweats on in my wrestling boots. I'm running the streets of Manhattan. And I told the pharmacist, because it was spelled the proper way, Richard Flair. I forget how his real name is spelled.
Right.
And I'm explaining to him who that was for. And he filled the prescription, and I was able to get it back to Rick in time, Mr. Flair in time. And when I gave it to him, he was like, "Oh, you're my hero." "Oh, Sonny, you're my hero." And it's like, obviously it's not where I doubt he would remember that whole story even, or maybe he would, I don't know. But just hearing that, I mean, talking with Mr. Sammartino, in the
Oh my
UWF,
gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
and at the, what was that feast in Sunnyside, Queens, the Mother Cabrini or San Gennaro feast, I forget.
Right. The Italian feast. Right.
Yeah. And I got to walk with Mr. Sammartino because everybody just kept walking, and he stopped to talk to two elderly women who said, "Oh, that's the wrestling fellow. The ones with the white hair and they're dressed all in black."
Sure. Sure.
And he was speaking to them in Italian, and everyone else kept walking. So I got to walk with him all by myself. And, he said, "Keep your nose clean, stay away from the drugs, the nightlife, just, and I appreciated. I had two heroes growing up, Bob. One was President Kennedy. The other was Mr. Sammartino.
Bruno Sammartino, yeah. I'll tell you what, in my dealings with Bruno, you talked to him for 5 minutes, you felt like you knew him for 10 years. He was one of those kind of people. No caste system and no star stigma at all. Nothing like that. He was a real gentleman. He really was.
And in the WWF back then, I didn't feel like there was, here I am. I got an apology from Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig, because I was his first match after winning the Intercontinental Championship. Now, if that's available on YouTube, and I don't know if it is, you'll notice he's coming out to the ring and you see him holding the belt up, but it's backwards. All you see is the leather.
Right.
They forgot to bring the championship belt to TV taping. So he grabbed one of the tag belts and carried that out. But now he's getting ready for a pay-per-view, so he's laying some stuff in. And I'm okay with snug on TV. I expect it. I'd prefer it.
Mm-hmm.
And, man, he must have given me like 13 chops. He's like, "Hey, that sounded good. How about another?" Picks me up. Bam, bam. And, we're in the locker room, and he goes, "Hey, Sonny, I'm sorry I went so hard on you, but I have to with the pay-per-view coming up, and they just gave me this title." And I was like, "Nah, was everything okay?" And he was like, "No, everything was perfect. You were spot on. Thank you." But, he didn't have to do that. What was I going to do? Complain? "Hey, Kurt, I'm sorry, but we got to go outside, man. You hit me a little too hard."
No.
Oh, God, he would have killed me.
Yeah, sure. But here's the thing, too. It's amazing when you get to know some of these guys, how respectful and courteous they are to everybody. And you wouldn't expect that because wrestlers tend to be big bruiser guys, But the fact is, wrestling's a two-way street, if it's done right. If it's done professionally, it's a two-way street. And that's a perfect example of what you just said. He will come to you and go, I hope I didn't, I hope it wasn't too much. But you wanted it, to your credit, you wanted it to look real and you wanted it to look, tough. And that's obviously what happened in that match.
Well, I never liked when somebody would start a bump before they got touched. And because remember now, we're talking about late 80s into the 90s. VCRs had started to become very popular. That 5 years earlier, they were too expensive. But now you had people sitting at home.
Listen, I bought my first VCR in 1980 for $1,000.
There you
know
go.
Why I bought it? I'll tell you this. This was on a previous show, but I bought it because Larry Zbyszko and Bruno Sammartino were starting to argue on television, and I knew something big was going to happen. So I spent $1,000 on a VCR so I could tape it. I swear this is true. It's true.
I believe you. And do you remember Betamax?
Sure. Same time, yeah.
That was the Sony version, and that there were two that they were competing, VHS and Beta.
Right.
And VHS won out. But
Well,
there
I
were
think
people at home
they were the
hitting
same,
score.
really. I think VHS won because they were cheaper, to be honest with you. But everybody,
I don't know that
I
type
think
of
the
stuff.
Betamax was a little more expensive, but no big deal. But
But
no, you're right. This was the beginning of the tape trading days.
right. And now you'd have somebody pausing. Look, he never even touched him. Oh, look. And that's a very bad look. Besides, even the guy in the front row, you don't want him going, oh, that's BS. You want what is it called? The suspension of disbelief? Am I
That's
saying that?
exactly right. We use that phrase every week on this show. every week.
But if they can, for a moment, forget that they're not seeing actual violence
Mm-hmm.
and they buy into the violence that they're seeing, we've
Right.
done our job well. And
That's exactly right.
if we go home hurt, that's okay. Pain is okay. Injury is not. And there's a difference between hurt and injured.
Right.
So, Kurt Hennig roughened me up a little bit, but I'll tell you what, when he did the perfect plex, as we're locked and the referee started counting, he goes, Sonny, you okay? And I'm like, yeah. And I was so happy he said that because I thought he was angry with me. That's how bad it was in the ring. I'm like, what did I
Mm-hmm.
do?
Yeah.
But no, everybody was so great. It's I loved Ultimate Warrior. I hear things about Warrior. God rest his soul. He was wonderful to me, and it's the only time I broke locker room protocol. I actually asked him to sign a couple of posters for me.
There you go.
Remember, I was taking care of my nephew after my mom passed away,
Right.
and he signed to Robert, Feel the Power, Warrior, and he was willing to do that. And everybody's, I can't, gosh, I can't think of a negative thing about a single person. I got to see Barry Horowitz. Crazy as it sounds, Barry Horowitz was so great.
Mm-hmm.
And boy,
He was a great wrestler too. He was an excellent wrestler.
oh, absolutely. And if they
Mm-hmm.
needed somebody, let's say they forgot to slate somebody in, or it was somebody's second match, but they got injured in the first one, he was the first one to raise his hand. I want to go out there. I want more. And you didn't get paid extra for the matches; you got paid for the day. And
Right.
he was just always on, always upbeat. Um, it's so everybody. I really can't think of anything that happened that I would ever say, I didn't enjoy that. Everything.
Right. So you never. Well, they call it taking liberties. Nobody ever took liberties with you then.
Well, again, I don't consider being snug taking liberties.
Right. Right. I
Nobody
mean,
ever
there
spoke to.
are tales of some of the rule breakers going a little too far and really having less regard for their opponent than they probably should. But you didn't really experience anything that extreme, I guess.
No, I was ready for it with Shawn Michaels, honestly. And at that time, the super kick was not his finish; it was just a spot during the match. And when he set me in the corner, I was ready to. I'm like, okay, let's see what's going to happen. I'm going to do what I'm told because it's his advertising time. But he was so good that the sole of his boot just hit my whiskers enough that they moved. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
And but he's a pro. He was a pro then. And but no, nobody. I can honestly say no. Nobody took liberties.
That's great. It's nice to
And of
hear.
course, I submitted
But
to Sergeant Slaughter's noogie. I'm probably the only one who's ever done that. So I should be in the Hall of Fame. I submitted to a noogie. Nobody's ever done that.
There you go. What the heck? Here's the thing too. Their roster was so full of the best talent in the world at that point that you're in the ring with the best professionals around in the whole world at that stage.
That's
And
correct.
that's saying something too.
Yeah, there was no B team. Everybody was A team.
Yeah.
I got like when I worked with one man gang, Akeem. I'm going to tell you, he was so light that if he didn't make a noise when he hit me, I wouldn't have known he hit me to sell it. So that's when you got a guy that big that can take care of you that well.
Yeah.
And there's just everybody. Not Wayne Bloom, excuse me, Mike Enos. He was going to do this. He did a belly to belly where he brought you straight back and bridged. And I was a little concerned about taking that. And I'm talking with him, and he goes, Sonny, trust me. And I was just the way he said, trust me. I was like, okay. Oh my gosh, there was nothing to worry about. He controlled the whole thing, brought me over like a baby. I feel ridiculous thinking that I was worried about Mike Enos. Of course he can do that move. And Wayne Bloom, he was great. I can't think of a single time where I left the ring feeling like, you know what, that was unnecessary. Not one time.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going through your record, and part of the thing, once you and I talk on this, the second half of my show in this edition is going to be talking about the guys that people considered guys like Frank Williams and Johnny Rods and the Mulkey Brothers and Gene Ligon, people from around the wrestling world that other wrestlers knew were great, even though they lost on television all the time. And that's what this show is about. So I figured you're the perfect person to talk about that, because who was a better wrestler than Johnny Rods? I mean,
nobody.
Right? I mean, nobody. Ask any wrestler. That's who you get the straight poop from. Ask a wrestler, and they'll tell you how good Johnny Rods was.
Johnny Rods was outstanding.
He really was.
Yes. And by the way, he was kind of a gatekeeper. He had a role outside of what you saw on TV.
Right.
If somebody had a bit of an attitude, Mr. McMahon, I think Sr., would maybe put him in with Johnny Rods, just to bring the guy down, his ego down just a little bit. Because Johnny could stretch you. He's a shooter.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody in the world knows it. It's, and look at what he produced. He produced Tommy Dreamer. He produced Vito LaGrasso. He produced Taz. Now, I don't think Mr. Rods will ever take credit for their talent and what they did with it, but he's the one that got them started. He's the one that taught them, trained them, showed them how to respect the business. And those are just three guys I named. I think I could go on and on if I thought a little harder.
I can think of 15. I mean, it's like he's one of the great trainers in the history of this business. There's no question about it.
I think in the Northeast, if I had to think real quick, I would say Killer Kowalski, Larry Sharp, Johnny Rods. I would put Johnny Rods and Killer Kowalski as number one and 1A, and then Larry Sharp. Obviously, if we go to the Midwest, there's Vern Gagne, Billy Robinson, and those guys. Down in here, I'm living in Florida now. But down here, you would have to put the great Malenko as a great trainer, Hiro Matsuda, Eddie Graham. There are some guys who just knew how to bring out the best in somebody. And these guys did that. And I was thinking about this, Bub. Something that I loved differently before characters were given to somebody. So you have a guy like Taker. You have a guy like Steve Austin. A lot of these guys, they sort of floundered around. They had the talent the whole time, obviously. But they floundered around because they kept being told what to do. As soon as they were given license to kind of be themselves.
Exactly.
Going back to like the 70s, that's when they blossomed. So Taker is just sort of an exaggeration of Mark Calloway,
Right.
Same thing, Stone Cold. The guy's a tough Texan. We're trying to make him a surfer. He's a tough Texan.
Well, whatever that is, he was. Whatever they called him, the ringmaster or something. I don't even remember what they called him, but it was not working.
No, but remember in the end,
the minute he did that interview with Doc Hendricks, who was Michael Hayes, saying, Stone Cold, what is
He said Stone Cold says
Austin
Stone Cold
316 says, "I
Austin
just whipped your
316
ass."
says, yeah.
Oh, new superstar born at that very moment. Bang. He was so over from that for that minute. He never looked back, and then, like you said, you nailed it. The minute with guys like that, they allow a little of their real personality to seep through their character.
Yes.
Jackpot. The Rock too.
Yep. Uh, Naturally charming, very witty. Let him go. Now,
Yeah.
you and I go back into the 70s. You had a guy like Mr. Patara. Well, just let him go.
Oh man, yeah.
Let him be Ken Patara.
He was great.
Superstar Billy Graham, who almost did an impersonation of Muhammad Ali. You know,
Right.
Vince McMahon, let me tell you something, Daddy. I'm the tower of power, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour. Let me wrap these pythons around. I mean, this sounds like Ali
Yes,
during Ali's heyday. You know, that's kind of bold.
Yep.
You know, you had Mr. Sammartino again. Wrestling was just an exaggeration of what he really was. Genuinely,
But I'll tell you,
yeah.
even though he was a soft-spoken man in his interviews most of the time when he didn't have a feud going on,
Yeah.
I have never seen more heat in my life of him simply walking down the aisle at Madison Square Garden.
Oh God,
the place would erupt. You know why? Because he was believable and they believed in him. That was the era for that, and
yes.
nobody could personify the real wrestler like Bruno Sammartino. You know, the real wrestler.
I agree with that. But I wish they would let people develop their own character.
Well, you know, in some cases it does work out that way even now, but I've never seen it as scripted as it is right now. I mean, it's just the way of the world. With the exception, well, no, I should say that with the WWE, AEW, I don't think they have a script for anything.
Yeah,
So it's like it's like a Wild West show over there. But so it is what it is. Times change, the formats change, the ring action changes. Let me ask you one question because this comes up on the show a lot. I think today's professional wrestlers, who I have nothing but respect for from back then to now, like I said, wrestlers are fantastic athletes.
Oh God,
I think they're working too hard now, and there's too much of a risk for injury. What do you think?
Yes, and I couldn't agree more. Also, because these are such high risk things they're doing, it takes far too long to set them up. So again, going back to that suspension of disbelief, you kind of lose that when it takes, you know, a minute and a half to get up to the top, get ready to do a backflip. That's extremely risky, and most of it, you don't really need it, in my opinion. You know, well, Goldberg proves you don't need it.
Right.
But these guys they're tremendous today. I can't speak highly enough of the athleticism.
Oh, yeah, athletically, these guys are, and women too. They're all fantastic. They're absolutely, and I think that's the healthiest thing to happen in wrestling in 30 years is the emergence of the woman wrestler as an absolute equal to the guys. There's no question about that now.
And I'm going to name two wrestlers that I'm going to pay tribute to. One I knew personally, one I knew a little bit. But Sherry Martel and Medusa Michelli.
Right.
They were the two that started it where you could be very, very beautiful and be tough. You know, it stopped being a cat fight. It became a wrestling match.
Right.
And I admire both of them. God rest Sherry's soul. She was wonderful. And I think Medusa's wonderful, the little I know of her.
Right.
But they turned women's wrestling into you could be beautiful and still hit hard without being a cat fight, just dragging somebody around by the hair. And you know what I'm talking about. It used to always just be cat fighting.
Well, you know, one way that the women's wrestling is better in WWE now than it was, I guess, about 20 years ago is it was a girly show for a while.
Yeah.
And now they focus on their athleticism. Sure, they're attractive, but, you know, if you're in shape, you're going to be attractive, you know, and they kind of bring that out in the athletes as opposed to some of the kind of lurid stuff they were doing 15, 18, 19 years ago. I think somebody woke up and said, we have some great athletes here. We might as well let them work. And you know what? You watch some women's matches now and they're incredible.
Oh, yeah. They're all amazing. But do you remember, of course you remember Trish Stratus.
Sure.
But I was watching a match once on TV, and she did this slow backwards type of bridge where it looked like something out of the Matrix to miss
The
a
Matrix, that's what
clothesline.
they call the move. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, was it?
Like
And I
somebody
thought, oh my
was about
gosh,
kicking her, and she would just ease back. Yeah.
yeah. But she went back a lot. It wasn't just, and then she would
Yes.
come up, the
Yeah.
clothesline would miss, and then I honestly I don't recall what she did after that, but that was amazing to me.
It was
Her
amazing. It was.
athleticism.
It was one of the great moves ever. I mean, that's a great maneuver. You're right.
Yep.
I mean, it's like nobody had ever done it before. I never saw it before.
No, and to see these young ladies bridge up and uh, just all of them, I could go on and on. I don't remember all of their names, but Lita,
Mhm.
Charlotte Flair. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah,
Becky Lynch. I see her now. She's unbelievable.
they're unbelievable athletes, every one of them. That division
Yes.
is fantastic. And what I like about the women's division is I think their storylines are way more realistic than the men's are. I don't. It's still I'm better than you most of the time. I'm better than you. I'll beat you. What? That's
Yeah.
all you need. That's all you need. That's all you ever
And
need.
you know, you and I I grew up watching matches. I call what I call myself when it comes to wrestling. I'm an arm drag, hip toss, basic wrestler.
Right. Right.
Um, and you can tell a whole story with just an arm bar, an arm drag, and a hip toss.
Hmm.
They did it my entire life growing up. So some of this high risk stuff, and I really am afraid that something bad is going to happen to one of these gentlemen. These are young guys; they're amazing. They can do so much. I used to be impressed with a man named Johnny Rivera. He was
I remember Johnny. Sure.
he was
Mhm.
enhancement, but he threw what a great drop kick he would throw.
Yes.
And I would watch his match. I forget all the people he wrestled. He was a babyface, so I'm sure he wrestled like Mr. Patara and
Hmm.
Bruiser Brody back then. The heels that came in. But he threw a drop kick like nobody I'd ever seen, and I enjoyed watching his matches. When I saw him standing in the ring, I didn't care who he was wrestling. I wanted to see him, and I'd like to see guys
Right.
be able to do more with less. And less is more is
Right.
the
Right.
personification of Undertaker. You know, he knew how to develop the match. No, I
I want to
apologize.
give a tip of the hat to a match and a wrestler that you know well from the day. Talk about a move, a great defensive move. Did anybody ever take a backdrop like Chris Michaels? I mean, come on. He was incredible in that regard.
I'm going to no. And it's funny because Chris Michaels was very dedicated, and he got better and better and better and better. Um, his backdrop would get higher and higher and higher, and he would start. He got more and more risky, and he was with the original ECW.
Yes, he was, as I was, believe it or not. I don't even know if you know, I was their first TV host.
Did not know that,
Hmm.
but they made a wise choice. And
I can tell you right now that they brought in Chris on my recommendation.
well, you made a wise choice because
Yeah, I
there's
talked to
nobody who'll
Todd
work
Gordon.
harder.
I was talking to Todd Gordon. He was asking me about some of the New York area guys, and I said, this one, that one, this one, that one. So whoever he decided to contact, at least I
Good,
can,
excellent choice.
yeah.
And the last thing, and now I moved to Florida in late '90s. I don't remember exactly, but I did where I'm going to say I hosted. I didn't. I don't even know what it's called. I'm a member of the Knights of Columbus, and I
Okay.
wanted to do a fundraiser for the Knights of Columbus. So I asked Tommy D to be the promoter, and I'd underwrite it, I guess. I said, and the only stipulation I had, because I didn't want to interfere, was because we had come up together, and I think so highly of Chris Michaels had to be on the show.
Right.
And I'm watching. His was the only match I watched, by the way. And he put a table in the corner and wound up getting like slammed into it. Where this was at the beginning, I guess, of where tables were getting used like this. And all I could think of while I was watching the match was, my goodness, how it doesn't surprise me how far he came, but it 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 didn't surprise me, but I was astonished at the same time. You
Right.
know,
One of those
this
things, because somebody that's how it works.
yeah, and he was. I would pay a ticket to watch it. Well, I don't know about now because he's probably like 197 years old. I'm
No,
only
you know what?
kidding, Chris.
You know what? From what I understand, he's still working.
He's always been very fit. So it doesn't surprise me that he's able to, so long as his injuries stay down. But I'm sure he's had some.
Yeah.
But I'm also sure that he's probably sharing what he knows with younger talent.
Yeah.
So
Well,
an excellent guy to have in the locker room. And he's just a really, really good guy. His father used to come down to my school, my wrestling school.
mhm.
And Mr. Pierce would, Chris Michael, Billy Pierce, uh, Mr. Pierce would hang out, and it, we loved having him. He was an elderly man, so the only person he had was Chris Michaels, and so he would hang out with the wrestlers. And super nice man. Um, Chris Michaels, unbelievable, and I'm not going to box him in just as a really good wrestler. He's a really good person. He really, really is. So I'm glad for him.
There you
And
go.
if he's still wrestling, I hope he's doing well.
Well,
Um,
look,
and I'm sure he's sharing his knowledge with others.
one of my great pleasures, and I talk about this all the time, was I had the ability to go to places and see wrestling and go back to my office and talk to the editors and go, I want to do something on this guy or that guy or this woman or that guy. And the fact that I was able to give a little bit of publicity to people like you and Chris and Brian Donahue and some people, some kids out of Baltimore. I can't remember their names at this point, but I remember if I came back, they usually would let me. I mean, I did the first article on Rob Van Dam. I introduced Sid Vicious to the world when he was in Georgia originally. Um, that's something I look back at with pride because you know what, I could pick them out of a lineup. It's like if I watched a whole mess of matches and I kind of had a good eye for talent, and I could go back and say, let's do something on these kids because they're going to be something. In fact, I was the guy at my office going, we got to do something on Cactus Jack. We got to do something on Cactus Jack.
Oh yeah.
And he was just working high schools around 91. I'm going, no, seriously, you got to do something on Cactus Jack. And I kept pushing him and pushing him and pushing him. And I'm not saying that we made him famous. He made himself famous.
Right. You're not taking
Whether you
credit.
saw him in a high school gym or WrestleMania, he always went all out. He was an amazing guy that way.
And that's what I was talking about with the guys who you would say made it, dedicated themselves 100% to professional wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that they weren't family people as well, but as far as other interest, they had none. They didn't want to watch baseball games. They wanted to be in a ring somewhere. If they weren't wrestling a match in front of a crowd, they wanted to be working out. And Cactus is just, I mean, he was trained by Dominic DeNucci in Pittsburgh.
Right.
But he came to Mark Tendler's in Hauppauge and would work out with me in a garage on a mat. And thank God he was there because that was the training I got.
You brought up Mark Tendler. I got to ask you something.
Yeah.
Did he ever brand you as somebody famous on one of his independent shows? Because Mark was kind of famous for having a Bobby Piper or a Magnificent LaRocca or a Wild Samoan who wasn't even Samoan. Did he ever call you something different?
He wanted to.
Okay.
When I was younger, I resembled Rick Martel a little bit. And he wanted to call me Rich Martel, Rick Martel's cousin. And I'm actually going along with this because I didn't know I had a choice.
Right.
And I was talking with Cactus. Actually, it was on Mark Tendler's front lawn. And I'm talking to Cactus, and I'm like, I really don't want to do this. First of all, Rich and Rick are the same name. And, it's not what I want to do.
Right.
And this advice came from Cactus. He said, well, go in there and tell him you're Sonny Blaze. And he goes, and he said, Al, you can only be the second best Rick Martel. you can always beat the very best Sonny Blaze. So, and I always thought about that, as of course, I never reached the level of Rick Martel, but I reached as high as Sonny Blaze could. So I'm very proud of what I did, and
Well,
I'm
listen,
very
I'm
happy
proud of
to
you
for
too.
that advice.
I'm proud of you too. And I'll tell you why.
Thank
It takes a special person to be a professional wrestler. It takes a lot of determination. We talk about this on the show a lot. Not everybody can jump in a ring and wrestle, and it takes months and years to perfect. It's really the hard knock life when you're starting out. And the fact that you went as far as you did, I got to tell you, every time I saw you on TV, I went, "Hey, look at him! Look, he's on WWF." Same with Chris and all these other guys. I mean, it gave me a sense of pride to know that you guys could work your way up to the big leagues, because that was the big leagues. It doesn't matter if you won or lost; you were in the big leagues.
I got videos that occasionally I watch just to remind me of my current state of decrepitude.
Me too. Yeah, this is why this is the outdated wrestling hour, my man. Because it's like, I'm like an old tin can. I'm all dented on one side. It's like I ain't what I used to be at this point. So,
oh, I'm a relic.
Getting out of bed, I look like a newborn foal. My legs are all wobbly, and So, hey, listen, Al. Really great seeing you again, man. I don't know what to say other than thank you. I'm sure our listeners have enjoyed listening to your words, and all I can say is Godspeed, and I hope everything goes great, no matter what you choose to do in the future, my friend.
And Bob, it's great. You're a dear old friend. You always were, even when we were not connected. Right. I've always, I've looked back at those articles. I've read them 10,000 times. My eyes are almost wearing the words off the page. And I love you dearly, my friend. And I appreciate all you did.
Well, it's funny. I hear from people I don't even know who said, you wrote this, you wrote that. Me and Craig Peters were talking on a show a couple of weeks ago. Craig was with PWI too.
Yep.
And
by the way, I know one of Craig's cousins.
Oh, there you go. Okay. But here's the beauty part about what we did. And we were talking about this. The fact that people valued what we did, enjoyed it, and were entertained by it, that's the big reward. That's the reward. The fact that somebody like you has one of my words on your wall, you pin it up on your wall in a frame. You don't know what that means to me. It means a whole lot. So I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that.
And I'm talking, ladies and gentlemen, to a great professional wrestler, Broadway Sonny Blaze. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, bro.
Appreciate it. Craig Peters, Broadway Sonny Blaze, the whole bunch of people that have been on the show of late, old friends. It's just been wonderful. I hope you've enjoyed reminiscing with all of us about, classic professional wrestling. Broadway Sonny Blaze was one of a rare breed of guys who would get out there and pretty much get their asses handed to them, on a regular basis. But you know what? It was part of what made wrestling wrestling. You were enhancement talent that pushed the stars, and you did the job with a smile. I mean, even Barrett Cicluna did it at the end. He really did. Couldn't have been that bad of a job. So let's give thanks and remember all the great guys who used to lose on television. I remember a guy named Tommy R. who worked the Buffalo Utica circuit. Pretty good wrestler. Lost on TV every week. And the rebel Ronnie Saunders from that same NWF federation with Pedro Martinez. In the WWF, you remember Frankie Williams from Columbus, Ohio. The famous slow motion fall he used to do. Jose Estrada, really good worker, just like Johnny Rods. Gypsy Rodriguez. Steve King, the eternal undersized good guy, but he was there every week getting beat up by Ken Patera or Baron Von Raschke. Or how about the Monkeys in the NWA, or actually the great Gene Ligon, who was as good a worker as anybody you'd ever find. But he knew his role and he did it well. He even became an announcer after a while. The Mulkey brothers, the NWA, and just those blonde twins. Everybody remembers them. They used to call it Mulkey Mania and stuff like that. But you know what? It takes a good wrestler to get in the ring and get squashed and come back for more and more and more, because it helped the promotions. That was the style back then. That was what happened. So let's give a tip of the cap to all the jobbers. I don't like that word. I don't even like enhancement talent. You know what they were? Professional wrestlers. We could use a little more professional in wrestling these days, don't you think? Well, in any event, we hope you enjoyed the show. We got a lot more coming. Come back and see us every Friday. We put a new one out every Friday. And if we don't, we will give you plenty of notice and let you know when the next shows will be scheduled. But for now, Fridays as we go. So you want to get a hold of us? Facebook, I'm Robert Smith. Our website is outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. Gmail, outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Write us. Get some information. Ask a question. Make a query. Anything you want. We're here for you. Twitter, you can find me as Bob Smith NYC. I want to thank great Brian Teo again for our very cool theme song, which is called Hold On a Sec. Some guitar work going there. I think I'll play the whole thing this time out. So until next time, this is Bob Smith, your old PWI guy, saying thank you for listening. And we'll leave you with the words of the great Michael P.S. Hayes of the Fabulous Rewords. Heaven don't want us and hell's afraid we'll take over.